Before we start, I want to note that we uncover several documents in Chapter 4 that make use of single and double asterisks to stand in for taboo phrases. For convenience sake, I'm going to use the actual phrases that are confirmed for us in Folklorist 9 and 10, as it would be tedious to literally say single asterisk and double asterisk every time they appear. Respectively, these refer to Gate to Hell and Sacrifice. Without further ado, let's get into this and buckle up because this one is going to be a bit longer. Chapter 4's title is The Forbidden Ritual, and if you've been following along with either my videos or the obtainable documents from your own playthrough of this magnificent game, you should be aware of the fact that shit got real for the inhabitants of All Gods Village, and they must have gotten pretty desperate if we're even mentioning this taboo ritual. As a reminder, in Folklorist 3, which can be found in Chapter 3, we did learn that the villages were getting antsy due to an uptick in earthquake activity after the failed ritual performed by the Tachibana twins. We've only seen Itsuki's spirit thus far, so we should probably be able to, at this point, safely assume that Itsuki at least carried out his part in the ritual of fucking killing his twin brother. Christ. Anywho, as soon as Chapter 4 opens, Mayu says the following. Quote, "There's something familiar about the smell here." This begs the question, a very important question we will find ourselves needing to ask for the rest of this chapter. Is this Sae or Mayu talking? It stands to reason at this juncture that we can't be sure. This line could be a nod to the fact that Sae has taken possession and is registering sensory input through Mayu, who is acting as some sort of conduit. That's one valid interpretation based on the limited knowledge we have. The other interpretation, equally impossible to refute or ignore, is that Mayu and Mio may have been here before. We know they used to play in the forest surrounding All Gods Village, which would put them in the vicinity. But does their connection go beyond mere proximity? That remains to be seen. Starting in Chapter 4, we also begin to get snippets from Yai's and Sai's shared butterfly diary and Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, I knew it. Yai and Sai, and probably Mio and Mayu as well, are what I as an identical twin myself refer to as freaks. What I mean by this is, as I got older and became more aware of how others perceived my brother and me, I started to realize that people looked at us with interest, but also as a sort of sideshow. I don't mean this negatively. It just never occurred to me how jarring it can be to see two people who look and act almost exactly the same because I lived it. That was my normal. But it became clear to me that there is a baseline freakishness surrounding all twins that apparently oogs people out. But speaking as one, I'm here to tell you even I look at some specific sets of identical twins and get the heebie-jeebies. But the ones I'm referring to are the ones who have developed a codependency, especially in their adult life. They are never apart. They share all the same hobbies and ambitions. They go to the same college. They share something as private as a diary. Yae and Sae are such twins, which makes their dynamic and Yae's eventual abandonment so much more interesting. I mean, sharing a diary. You couldn't get much more conjoined unless they were literally a pair of conjoined twins. Anyway, the first entry in the Butterfly Diary confirms from Yae's and Sai's perspective what we learned in Chapter 3. It reads, quote, "Munakata and his teacher came to the village today. He said he was worried about Itsuki and came to help. This tracks with the vision Mio saw of Makabe and Munakata approaching the twins and their father. Yae then goes on to reveal that she is conflicted as a result of Makabe's questions. She knows that Munakata and his teacher would like to speak with Itsuki, but she was also aware that the village's secrets must be protected. Yae signs off after this, so we can assume the words on the remaining 2 pages in this diary entry belong to Sae. She talks about the fact that Makabe took a picture of them with the camera obscura and that her, quote, face looks strange in the photograph. She then says something ominous, quote, he's, meaning Makabe, probably going to be sacrificed because our cleansing isn't finished yet. She follows this up with a desire to help Makabe escape so that the awful fate represented by the double asterisk doesn't befall him. We will learn why Sae is so eager to get Makabe and Munakata out of there, and it has everything to do with the Kusabi we heard about so much in Chapter 3. But I think the difference in tone between Yae and Sae speaks volumes about their characters. We will come to learn in these next 2 chapters that Sae is actually the stronger one, and something we're not really encouraged to believe because she's the one in the bloodstained kimono going around laughing all maniacally. But Yae exhibits wishy-washiness and fear, whereas Sae shows resolve and compassion. This distinction is key. Not long after we come across Folklorist 6, which brings us back to Makabe's perspective in response to Yae's and Sai's conveyed in the aforementioned Butterfly Diary entry. Here, Makabe confirms that the twins did urge him to leave and even gave him a map that reveals the location of a secret side door to help facilitate his escape. The pair clearly want this done as quickly and quietly as possible, as they encourage Makabe to fly from the mansion during the night. Makabe picks up on something incredibly discordant. While Yae and Sae are all urgency, the other inhabitants of Kurosawa Mansion, quote, are acting normally. This causes Makabe to wonder if there was, quote, some ulterior motive behind the generous hospitality. The final crucial piece of information we glean from Folklore 6 is the fact that Makabe made Munakata leave ahead of him. Again, based on the flashes to the bound person being pushed into the pit during Makabe's vision from Chapter 3, we can be fairly certain Makabe never succeeded in making it out of All Gods Village, but his forethought in telling Munakata to go prevented his young charge's demise, at least for now. And as we continue on, we solve a complicated doll puzzle, get a key, and then make our way toward the keyhole for that key. On our way, we come back to the room where Sae and the Kusabi appeared in Chapter 3, and Mayu takes her place on stage as Sae's form flashes over top of her, cackling as she do. Mio hesitantly approaches her sister and asks her what's wrong, which is the exact opposite of what I would have done. I would have yeeted so fast, no time for questions or concerns, thank you. Mayu responds by saying, it's nothing. And let me tell you, ain't nobody convinced by that, especially when the very next thing she fucking says is, I don't want to kill anymore. Excuse me? And then as we continue on, Mayu says, I have to get back. The ritual. For the village. We were born for this purpose. Destiny. We hear so many things that come out of Mayu's mouth this chapter that should make us wonder whether it is she or Sae speaking. My money's on Sae here, especially considering what we will learn in Chapter 5 and the fact that at one point, Mayu actually calls us Yae. That was a big tip-off. But again, there's a nice bit of conflating going on here, though we should think of Sae here and what she must have thought and felt. As explained in the last episode, this line now applies separately to Mio and Mayu. When we get to Chapter 5, we will gain sufficient insight to support the notion that perhaps Mayu and Mio were also born for this purpose. Probably the saddest thing we learn from Chapter 4 is contained in the Ceremony Master's Note 3. We quickly realize that the Ceremony Master is Yae's and Sae's father, Ryokan Kurosawa. He very poignantly gets the most devastating aspect of living in All Gods Village when he says, quote, when the twins were born, I was miserable, knowing that they were doomed. Could you imagine? If you feel so inclined to be a parent, having a child or even two for the price of one should be one of the happiest moments of your life. Couple that with your village's forbidden ritual that requires one twin to sacrifice the other, and you've got yourself a massive case of cognitive dissonance. My God. Reading on, it only gets more devastating. Quote, they were raised freely without pain or sadness. They say the pain of the gate to hell never stops. Jesus fucking Christ. Of course you would spare them any pain, discomfort, or inconvenience, knowing what will eventually be their fate. How utterly heartbreaking. And to top it all off, they say the pain of the gate to hell never stops? We can and should apply this to both the twin who is fated to go on living with the pain and guilt of having killed his, her, or their counterpart, as well as the soul of the twin who is fated to die. And it's not like some rando does it, it's your fucking twin. Fuck this note, but also well done writers. Way to relentlessly remind us that these are real people here, struggling against the machinations of a cruel ritual and an even crueler fate. And of course, Ryokan agrees with me, quote, the elder sister must kill the younger in the Crimson Sacrifice ritual. It's a cruel, horrible fate. Christ almighty. Leaving that depressing revelation for the time being, we make our way to a cell and see appearances of Seijiro Makabe, who is slowly coming to the realization that he will be a sacrifice, aka a kusabi. You see, we learn from this chapter that in times of desperation, a kusabi may be used as a sacrifice in order to satiate the hellish abyss for a time while the next set of sacrificial twins are undergoing purification for their ritual. Makabe's passing thoughts crystallize and take more coherent shape in Folklorist 8, where he writes, quote, long ago, a visitor to a mountain village became a ceremonial sacrifice. When the veiled priest captured me, they said things like outsider and kusabi. Gee, I wonder who the kusabi is then. Now, this is not everything that happens in Chapter 4 or even representative of everything that we learn, but a lot of what remains is mere confirmation from someone else's perspective of what we learned in earlier chapters. So, for the sake of also including Chapter 5 in this episode, I'm going to move on. though we will discuss 2 last documents from Chapter 4 when we get to probably the most important cutscene from Chapter 5, as they are incredibly relevant. Chapter 5, titled The Sacrifice, begins after Mayu and Mio are once again separated. Somehow Mayu gets trapped in a cell and Mio must abandon her again in order to search for a way to free her. Mayu begs Mio to instead stay with her, and I'm really interested to hear her full plan, because how would staying by her side and not finding the key to the cell work out in anyone's favor? Get a grip, girl. We'll be back in a jiffy. Right after she begs her sister not to heartlessly betray her again, this is really starting to get old. We flash back to that fateful day in the woods again, and this is actually a really smart move, especially when we get to a very crucial cutscene between Yae and Sae later on in this chapter. While Mayu and Mio were merely playing around in the forest, we'll see that this was never mere child's play, something that is hinted at after the conclusion of the cutscene when Mio reiterates to her sister that she is just going to find a key and will be right back. In response, Mayu says in a really creepy, distorted voice, "Dear sister, are you leaving me again?" All I can say is something Sae this way comes, and look out. Finally able to leave the Kurosawa mansion, a place we have been trapped in for 2 chapters by the way, we make our way back to the storehouse in which Itsuki Tachibana is confined. As we approach, Sae's spirit appears and she says, if it was to come to this, we should have done the ritual. When we reach the place where she stood, we can find another butterfly diary entry, and this one is particularly interesting because the first page is left blank. At first I thought this was an error, but think about it. Yae and Sae share this diary, but at this point Yae has fled, leaving Sae behind. Despite that, Sae leaves the first page in this entry blank, which is deafening in its insistence of Yae's absence. This was fucking brilliant. Anyway, Sae says some stuff about Yae abandoning her and how what's happening to Itsuki is all their fault, yada yada, we get it, but what a really cool detail. To linger here for a moment though, Sae's spoken words are actually super important as they reveal her desire to stay and do what is required of her despite her sister's absence. Toward the end of Chapter 4, we find Butterfly Diary 3, in which Sae says she doesn't really want to leave the village or abandon the ritual, but Yae expresses a deep desire to get out, so Sae initially agrees to escape with her because more than anything, she wants to be with her sister. But if Sae had her way, they would stay and do the ritual, especially since she feels guilty about trying to help Makabe avoid his part in all of this as the Kusabi. This is actually really admirable of her. She doesn't want someone else to die, especially if she knows that she can appease the hellish abyss. Through Ryokan's urging, she'll even go so far as to attempt the Crimson Sacrifice ritual alone, which is confirmed in Ceremony Master's Note 5. Quote, Yae is not coming back. Did she really leave Sae behind? Did she survive in the forest? If Sae is cleansed and acts as Shrine Maiden alone, the gate to hell might be appeased. The records do not mention any rituals with a single Shrine Maiden, but I will do it. I have to try. Kinda makes you hate Yae and want Mio dead, doesn't it? No? Just me? Oh well, moving on. We eventually find the cell key and then have to make our way back to the Kurosawa mansion in order to free Mayu. When we return, we find out that Mayu is no longer there. But how? And if she could get out this whole time, why the hell did she put us through all this? Upon inspecting the cell's interior, we come across Mayu's note, which reads, quote, Itsuki, I'm so sorry. I want to see you and tell you how sorry I am. I'm sorry about Chitose too. This is called Mayu's note, but we can be sure it's written in Sae's voice. Though we aren't hit over the head with it, through various documents and the words she speaks, we come to realize that Sae is really a caring and sensitive girl. She knows what it means to be a twin in All Gods Village and even what it means to be an outsider. She maturely accepts her own fate, but she doesn't wish it on anyone else. Even though Itsuki helps orchestrate an escape plan that originally included her as well, she wants to apologize to him. Sae was clearly too good and too pure for this world, which makes the Malice's possession of her that much more horrifying. Immediately after finding Mayu's note, we see arguably the most important vision up until this point. We see Itsuki urging Yae and Sae to run and not look back, and then we see the pair running through the forest, and this should cause our hairs to stand on end. It is exactly the same, nearly shot for shot, of Mayu and Mio running through the forest from the beginning of the game and revisited in the beginning of this chapter. Sae slips and falls in exactly the same way, only Yae doesn't appear to stop. Well, we know where she ends up based on the first game, so we have to assume, at least for now, that she keeps running, leaving her sister for dead. We cut to Sae sitting dejectedly, surrounded by the villagers. Though the others aren't so hopeful, Sae insists that Yae will come back for her. She will. Now, at first I thought this was misplaced faith, but I see something else here, something much more sinister. If Yae won't, and maybe even can't come back, perhaps, through a certain malicious force of will, another set of twins can inherit Sae's pain and suffering and be forced into this vicious cycle as mirrors. I mean, look at her facial expression. I thought because of her young age she was merely being obstinate in the face of the cold hard truth. But there's a certainty there. Yae may not come back, but her spiritual successor will be forced to. After this, we once again take control of Mayu, who inexplicably has emancipated herself from her cell and is on her way to purify herself in preparation for her role as the ritual sacrifice, as confirmed in Folklorist 5. We have no choice but to follow her trail once again right into the start of Chapter 6. That'll do it for this episode. See you in the next one.